Rockets fans, welcome to the Rockets Launch Pod, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets, Sports Talk 790. Rockets! Ready to go! Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Rockets Launch Pod starts now.
Welcome aboard.
DuBose here, Paulo, Alves there. Welcome back to another episode of the Rockets Launch Pod, presented by Clutch Fans and with support from Sports Talk 790, official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. It's Wednesday, the 18th of February. The Rockets are 33-20, the number 4 seed in the Western Conference. They have not played in a week due to the All-Star break. That will soon change. They're back in action Thursday night in Charlotte. We'll talk about that a little bit. Although today's show will be more bigger picture trends since we haven't had a game in over a week. There's certainly some things to talk about, including recent developments. We'll get to that shortly. But in terms of, I guess, the scope of our discussions, I want this to be more macro than micro to sort of preview the back half of the regular season, the upcoming playoff run, and ultimately what makes this a successful season for the Rockets. So we'll get back into more micro game-by-game analysis next week when we have a few games to react to. Now, we've had this break. The Rockets have gotten to recharge. We've gotten to recharge. I want to look more holistically at what needs to happen over the final 29 games of the regular season, the playoffs beyond that, and what ultimately is going to lead us to feel optimistic about the years ahead versus perhaps needing to make significant changes this summer. We'll get into all of that shortly, but Paulo, I'll start you with this. Going into this game against the Hornets, what is your greater concern? Kevin Durant's recent propensity for turnovers or Alperen Şengün's ability to shoot and defend?
Can I go with both? Well, no, I'm gonna be honest. It's probably Şengün's ability to defend because that's something that's gonna manifest itself every single possession that he's on the floor. And KD's turnover proneness is gonna show up with tops 8 possessions a game, which is a lot. 8 turnovers is a lot, but I don't know how many possessions starter plays per game. But I would guess.
Did you understand the reference?
Oh, okay. See. I was counting on addressing that first, but I took it as face value. That's my bad.
Okay, well, I'm glad to have gotten one over on you. Yeah, let's start with the alleged KD burner storyline. I'm saying alleged because to this point, KD has not addressed it publicly, and those were among the screenshots that were leaked. Of course, we are in a world where screenshots can be faked, and since, certainly in my case, as someone credentialed inside the building, I want to be responsible. I want to give Kevin Durant a shot to tell his side of the story. It's possible it's not true. It's possible that some of it is true, but not all of it. Or it's possible that all of it's true. Well, I don't know all of it. There were certainly some screenshots that were fake and people piling on. But it's certainly an interesting storyline in a week that we thought was going to be relatively quiet. KD and Şengün played in the All-Star game. It was relatively uneventful. Reed Shepherd in Rising Stars. But yeah, there has been a lot of talk this week about the alleged KD comments and, if true, what they would mean. And I want to start off the top by saying one narrative that's been out there in the last 24, 48 hours that I don't like. There's been this talk of why aren't bigger accounts talking about it, i.e. people in the media, big influencers on social media, and so on and so forth. I mean, some of it is giving some deference to Kevin Durant and waiting to see his side of the story. We're not going to have to wait much longer. The Rockets are back in action tomorrow night, so they are going to have media availabilities. They simply haven't in the past week because they haven't had any team activities. So I'm pretty confident in saying that this will get addressed. And just on a professional human level, you always want to hear both sides of the story before you rush to a conclusion. But more than that, Paulo, like my take on this, it's not about, if true, what it says about Kevin Durant. What we're concerned about is what it means for the Houston Rockets as a basketball team. And that comes down to not how we feel about it, but about how the guys who allegedly were talked down about in these group chat screenshots, which, by the way, it wasn't as if KD was putting his teammates on blast. It was meant to be a private conversation. You can certainly question if he should be more discreet in who he trusts, but it wasn't like he was using his bully pulpit to try and throw these younger guys under the bus. But according to the screenshots with the Rockets, it was all Alperen Şengün with his shooting and defense, and Jabari Smith, let's say his overall IQ, among other things, that were allegedly called into question. And in terms of what it means for the success or failure of the Rockets, it's going to come down to how they feel about it. And so there's so many variables that we don't know yet. First off, is it true? Is it entirely true? Is it partially true? Is it total fake news? And then if it is true, even if we assume the worst, then what's Kevin doing behind the scenes? Is he addressing it head on? Is he denying? Is he deflecting? Is he apologizing? What's Ime Udoka's role? There's so many variables that we don't know yet. And I'm not saying we're going to learn everything, but we're going to learn a lot more over the days ahead. And then most importantly, we'll see how these players interact with one another on the court starting tomorrow night in Charlotte. Maybe they move past it. Maybe it's a non-story. Maybe it's fake news. Or maybe you can see and sense that the chemistry is off and this becomes a lingering storyline. It's something that's hard for the young players to get over, being sort of called out, even in private, by one of the greatest players of all time and someone that they had looked up to for years. I don't know how this is going to play out. But what I do know is that how I feel about it is not the story. This is not, how do we feel about Kevin Durant? Is he going to win Times Man of the Year, or I guess hypothetically Teammate of the Year in 2026? This is about how it affects the Houston Rockets as a basketball team, at least from our perspective. Maybe there's others around the NBA that are into the clickbait, but for us, it's how does it affect the Rockets and whether they win or lose games. And the ultimate story there is still to be told, and it's not going to be decided by how we feel. It's going to be decided by how the players feel, the leadership of Ime Udoka and Kevin Durant, and what happens moving forward. And that's if at least parts of this are true, which we still don't know yet. So that's why I haven't weighed in too heavily on podcasts or my social media pages. It's not that I'm trying to avoid it. It's just in terms of what actually matters, taking predictive value moving forward, what it means in the locker room to these guys and on the court in the weeks ahead. I mean, it's about how they process it. And we haven't even talked to the guys yet, let alone seen them on the practice court, in real games, behind the scenes. It's so speculative at this point that I just, some of the memes are funny, and it's certainly something I'm watching with a raised eyebrow, but I don't see the point in rushing a take or jumping to any conclusions. And that's why, it's not that I'm averse to talking about it. I've seen that storyline that, why are people just trying to sweep this under the rug? I don't think it's that. It's just in terms of what it means for the Rockets, that's still to be determined, right?
Yeah, I think there's two sides to it, right? The first one is what matters truly is how Jabari Şengün and the rest of the team feel, right? If that's like like if they take it too hard, or if they are offended by it, if it's real, that may break team chemistry, and that may force decisions in the offseason about how we move forward with this team. And these will be discussions that we'll have as we go further along in the season and see, okay, what's the impact of this, right? Because KD can deny it, and then his teammates can believe him. They cannot believe him, or KD can say it's true or it's partially true, and his teammates can forgive him, or his teammates cannot forgive him. So there's various paths there. As far as what you said, or about people saying, people are trying to sweep this under the rug, and a lot of the bigger accounts on Twitter are not talking about it, at least the Rockets-sided ones. Is this, the organization silencing everybody and telling everybody not to talk about it? It's far simpler than that. I'll speak for myself because I'm the only person who I can speak for. To me, it's two things. I don't want, I try not to take myself too seriously, But I do think that there's a little bit of responsibility that comes with having a platform. And this applies to sports and to everything else, which is something that's disregarded nowadays a lot. And not going to get into that, into the wider world version of this. But you do have the responsibility to, before you judge something, to have a little bit more than just screenshots posted by Devin Booker or whatever AVIs on Twitter before you make, a comment on whatever it is. So there's a little bit of responsibility that comes with having a platform. And I have, just an account on Twitter. There's guys out there like Ben. There's guys out there like Jackson, like Kelly Eco that have, whole media outlets behind them, and they have that even more responsibility than I do. So that's the first part. The second part, and being, fully transparent, it is so easy. Like, if you react to this within the first hour, it is so easy to make a fool of yourself. I've had my fair share of being reactionary to stuff and then making a fool of myself later. We obviously have the Eric Gordon what's so fucking funny tweets reply. We have more recently a KB Roosh one. Like, it's something that could very easily be something, and you're dunking on it, and you're right because it turns out to be true. It can also be that it's not true, and you make a fool of yourself being one of the main drivers behind, dunking on someone that at the end of the day actually didn't do it. And so that's mostly why I didn't jump to a conclusion there. And mostly why my take on it, I've talked about why I didn't kind of have a take on it, but why my take on it on even now is going to be, taking both scenarios into consideration, which is, well, if it's true, well, if it's not true. Well, if it's not true, it is, I would say that there's a good amount of evidence that makes it a little bit hard to be fully not true or fully a coincidence, just because of the people who follow the account, the people that the account has blocked, some close friends from KD answering to stuff that only KD would know, who knows? There's also how much of those screenshots are true, obviously, how many of them are made up, what parts are, real, what parts aren't. If they are real, I do think that it does not reflect well on a KD, talking about his teammates like that. I'm not an athlete, so I've played sports in my life, but I don't know how common it is for these guys to, even if they don't voice it, feel some of the same thoughts that KD expressed in that group chat towards their teammates if they are heated coming off a loss, right? If you asked anybody on this team coming off a loss, hey, how do you feel about whoever played? And they were being 100% honest and unfiltered and not a media response, how many of them wouldn't, defer a bit of blame or distribute a bit of blame and then criticize their teammates? Who knows? I like to think people are not like that, but we're not perfect, and then not being perfect doesn't mean you're the worst person in the world immediately. So regarding the sports part of it or the teammates part of it, I mean, I would be pretty upset, especially if I were Jabari, because for Shingun, right, it's criticism of his play, right? And I am sure, and we've seen clips of KD, kind of complaining on the court about Shingun's defense, right? Perhaps more respectfully than the comment that the message that is alleged that he sent. The Jabari one, the word used, it's a bit disrespectful beyond basketball, and I wonder, especially considering Jabari idolizes KD, I do wonder how that one will shake out. And I think that if that one is true, it becomes a little bit tougher to swallow if I'm Jabari. But at the same time, even if it is true, and even if guys are upset, guys are still professionals at the end of the day. And so I'm sure that they won't be full, all out, just, making a fuss on the court or refusing to pass someone the ball. I think it will be a little bit masked, but you'll definitely be able to tell if that's the case as well. And regarding how this bodes for the future, right? Well, first thing, I think the first KD burner scandal was actually between Golden State Warriors championships. So he did go on to win the championship anyway. We're obviously not the Dynasty Warriors, so obviously we have less of a margin for stuff like this to happen. But it's not impossible. It's not unheard of. It might light a fire under the team's ass if it turns out to be a lie, and they could use that as fuel. Although I do think that's maybe unlikely. And if it turns out that it is something that they can't move off or move on from, two things. If so, the KD trade, looking back, is going to be a disaster. I mean, they didn't give up that much, but they did give up some stuff for KD. So that's going to be looked back in a negative way. And the other thing is, well, kind of glad it happened this season and not next season, because it already feels like this season is a little bit down the drain. We already have so many injuries out for the season. If it were to happen, I guess the silver lining is that it happened in this season and not in a 2018 Rockets type season where you feel like you have everything and then something just crashes and burns and you're kind of ruining a really promising season. So I know that's not what people want to hear. But I try to find silver linings in these kinds of things. And it does reflect negatively if it is true, right? And I think the fact that KD took so long to address it makes me more worried that it might be true. It does reflect negatively on KD himself. But I'll be honest, I'm a Rockets fan. All I really care about is how, when a problem like this happens, sorry to say it, I don't really give a damn about KD's legacy or whatever it might be.
Right.
What I care about is, okay, what does this mean for the Rockets? How can we move forward from it? Do we have to trade KD? What are the possibilities if we do want to trade KD? What kind of leverage do we have? If not, if we want to move forward with this, how much do you invest into next season? While you know that you have KD, and then there might be some chemistry issues there. That's what and even looking at a shorter term, how's the team going to play out the rest of the season, knowing this or through this episode, right? That's what I really care about. The rest of the stuff, we can talk about it. It's fun. It is Houston Rockets related, but it's not what's truly important for the team. So it's a fun topic to debate, and I'm sure it will come up a few times in the next few pods. Yeah, that's mostly how I feel.
And if anyone's been living under a rock the last few days, just Google Kevin Durant burner account. Maybe you checked out over the All-Star break. Just Google Kevin Durant burner account and you can see exactly what we're talking about. I agree with you that the fact that it wasn't initially refuted or quickly, some sort of marketing promo, remember when LeBron faked us out with the whole retirement thing when it was a stunt for something related to Amazon, some sort of marketing promo? I think
Nobody fell for that, man.
well, I know, but my point is that if you're trying something like that, you don't let it linger for days. So I'm inclined to believe that, we're now multiple days into this and haven't gotten a direct denial that there might be something to it. However, I don't think it's necessarily as simple as saying, well, this proves the worst case is true. I think it could be that he wants to directly address it with his teammates and coaches in person, as opposed to initially taking to social media and dealing with more trolls. I could see that being a factor, and I didn't report back to Houston, the entire team, until actually today. That's my understanding, when they're going to fly to Charlotte. And so that could be part of it. It could also be a situation where it's nuanced, it's layered to where, parts of it are true. Like, I do think that there's some smoke tied to that particular account. And perhaps some of the screenshots are true, but then some are completely fake by people trying to pile on. And with these scandals on social media, it spreads like wildfire, and it's so tough to trace things back to the actual source. So it could be partially true, and that makes it more difficult to explain, for all of us. And I think it includes Kevin Durant himself. Twitter is not an ideal platform to discuss something like this, especially if it's nuanced and, it's not cut and dried, black and white, true or false. Well, 280 characters it's difficult. And that's why I like that we're doing this on the podcast, because there is potentially some nuance here. Well, there's certainly some nuance here, but there could be nuance to simply, is it true or is it false? And so perhaps that is why it hasn't been addressed on social media. And maybe he's waiting to talk to, teammates and coaches in person, or when he can address it on camera to members of the Houston media. Maybe that's as soon as, I think there'll be a practice today. If not, there will be a shoot around in Charlotte tomorrow. I'm sure there'll be a post-game availability in which there will be reporters on site. So maybe he wants to do it on camera. Like, there's a lot of different ways that this can play out. And Twitter, and it's, unless you pay for extra, the 280 character limit might not be the ideal format. I also enjoy that you brought up the 2017 parallel, because for Kevin himself, I mean, yeah, that is a pretty apples to apples comparison. People were clowning him like crazy when that story broke in, I think, September or October of 2017. And he went out and not only won the championship the next year, but he was the NBA Finals MVP for that Warriors team again. So it didn't affect him. He was able to tune it out. Now, folks will say, well, it's different this time because there's active teammates that allegedly were thrown under the bus. Yeah, that's fair. But again, it goes back to, we need to not speak for them. We need to let Alperen Sengun and Jabari Smith Jr. process it on their own terms. I can't speak for them. They have way more knowledge than I do. And they also are going to have info this week that we don't, in terms of how KD approaches it with them, what Ime Udoka says. There's so many different variables that we don't know. But in terms of what's different with the KD burner scandal this time relative to 2017, if there is a KD burner scandal, it's the teammate angle, the active teammate angle, and it's not our place to say how they should respond or how they will feel. I don't know. There's a lot of things that go into that, but I'm not Jabari Smith. I'm not Alperen Sengun, and so I'm going to defer to them on this situation, and we'll see how it plays out. I'm sure we'll come back to this conversation, as you said, over the next few, pods, the weeks and months ahead. I mean, this might be a big deal, or it might be a nothing burger. We'll have to see. The last element that I want to address before we turn the page exclusively to basketball, I do not think it's fair to take this information, if it's true, and then backfill. Because as you said, Paulo, I don't think these sentiments are all that uncommon. Hell, I have some of these sentiments with my job, and it's nowhere near as competitive or stressful as competing at the highest level in the NBA. There are times that I vent to people in my inner circle, most notably, my wife at the dinner table, about people that I work closely with. And I suspect that at times my coworkers vent about me to people in their inner circle. And we all move on and we work together productively. What's different in this case, for starters, it got out. And secondly, you can question, whether KD should be that open with people on the internet that he doesn't know that well. I mean, yeah, that's fair. That goes back to the original burner scandal and just, caring a bit too much about perception on the internet and some of these battles, if you will. I mean, yeah, you can certainly make those arguments, but in terms of what it means for the team, I don't think the fact that Kevin Durant has had these thoughts means, you can say that before this happened, the Rockets had terrible chemistry, and this just proves that something was wrong in the locker room. No, it doesn't work that way. I bet other teammates on the Rockets have had thoughts about Kevin Durant or other players on the team. This is normal. This is a part of high-stress jobs, and the NBA is as high stress as it gets with the stakes that are involved and the competitive juices that get flowing when you're playing at the highest possible level. So I do not think you can take this and backfill and say, this proves the Rockets have a fractured locker room and that something is wrong. No, this stuff happens with, I think, most professionals. It doesn't mean that the relationships are dysfunctional. Now, going forward, it could be, because most people vent to, people in their inner circle, and they, it's tight enough that it's not going to get out. And so the fact that now, if it's true, it's out, could that be different than just, vaguely assuming that, Jabari, for example, had that terrible shooting slump in early January? I'm sure he already knew that some of his teammates behind closed doors were, whispering mean things to their family members or friends, out of frustration, just venting, and then they all move on the next day. Like, I'm sure he already knew that, but could it be different this time that it's so public? Maybe, especially if KD doesn't handle it the right way behind the scenes. Again, assuming that this is all or partially true. Yeah, like, this could be different. All I'm saying is that I don't think it's fair to backfill and say, well, this proves blah, blah, blah over the first 50 some odd games. And, this explains X, Y, and Z from the first half of the season. No, I don't think it does. I do think moving forward, now that this is out there, if it's not entirely refuted, yeah, it's something that might explain future issues. And so we'll all watch with raised eyebrows, but I just don't think that you can or should use it retroactively. I've seen some folks doing that, and I just think that's unfair. That's expecting way too much of these guys. As you said, Paulo, they're human. Like, this is a part of venting. And, in this case, I think KD just got, a little too loose, if it's true, with the people he's sharing those private thoughts with. Again, not like he was trying to put these guys on blast if it turns out that this is all or mostly accurate. But, yeah, I don't think the underlying sentiment is just, terribly off base or unforgivable. I think it's just a natural part of venting, especially when you lose games at a rate more than you expect. And I think that's certainly been the case with the Rockets, who are just 20-16 in their last 36 games, heading into this post All-Star break stint starting tomorrow night in Charlotte. And that's what I want to talk about now, because I can, I can put on some rose-colored glasses and feel pretty good about this team moving forward, Paulo. And the biggest reason why, the first 2 years of Ime Udoka in Houston honestly weren't that dissimilar. In both of them, they limped into the All-Star break. Year one, they were 6 games under after a pretty good start to the year. Year two, they had that 6-game losing streak right before the trade deadline, right before the All-Star break. And then in the second half of both of those years, post-All-Star break 2 years ago, Ime Udoka's debut season in Houston, Rockets were 17-11, including the 11-game winning streak in March when Jalen Green just went off. Last year, they were 18-9 after the All-Star break, and that included 3 games at the end of the year that meant nothing. So they were basically 18-6. They clinched the number 2 seed with 3 games left to play, and they had a 9-game winning streak in March. So they played their best ball after the All-Star break, and I think it honestly makes a lot of sense. I think Ime Udoka is a guy who expects a lot from his teams effort-wise, especially on defense. And so I think the stretch between the end of the NBA Cup in December and the All-Star break in early February, those 6 or 7 weeks, there's a lot of games jam-packed into a tight window, and even more so for the Rockets, as spaced out as the schedule was early in the year, so the Rockets had to catch up. And that tight schedule, to make room for those weeks in which there's minimal to no activity, I mean, it's tough for a team that, in this case, has 2 of the top 3 guys in minutes per game in KD and Amen. It's led by a 37-year-old star in KD who might be more prone to fatigue, and he was turning the ball over a lot in the last few games before the All-Star break. Also had an issue with his ankle. And I think Ime Udoka has always been a coach who doesn't go as deep with his rotation as a lot of fans would like. So it's a tighter rotation than usual, at least relative to some teams around the NBA. It's a coaching staff that expects a lot effort-wise. Some of the key players are veterans who play extended minutes. I do think there's a case to be made that this team has been on fumes the last few years going into the All-Star break, and it might be just a reflection of stylistically how Ime Udoka chooses to coach. And this year especially, some of the things we've seen, the 3-point slump in January, I mean, if you don't have your legs, you're going to miss more threes. And in February, the increased turnovers across the board, most notably from KD, yeah, you get sloppy and you're not as willing to dive on the floor to secure those 50-50 balls if your legs aren't there. And the good news is that we have seen many of these issues the past 2 years. There was no KD, but there were pieces of this team, and they got fixed on the other side of the All-Star break when they had a week to recharge, and, they got their second wins, if you will. Reed Shepherd is a guy who, even though it's year 2, it's basically like year 1 in terms of adjusting to the NBA calendar because he played so infrequently as a rookie. I mean, you can be optimistic that historically Ime Udoka coach teams play well after the All-Star break. And you also look at the schedule amongst Western Conference contenders. I think the Rockets had the 6th easiest in the entire NBA. The team right in front of them in the standings in the race for number 3 and to be on the opposite side of the bracket from the Thunder, the Nuggets had the most difficult left in the entire NBA. So the Rockets have a relatively easy remaining schedule. The Nuggets, the team right in front of them, has the hardest. Historically, under Ime Udoka, the Rockets have been much better after the All-Star break. So there are reasons to be optimistic. And on paper, the fix isn't that difficult. When I look at this year's Rockets team, there's basically 3 versions. There's that 13-4 start in October and November when they had, as you mentioned, Paulo, at the time, one of the best net ratings in NBA history, and they were just dominant. And I think, it's no coincidence that's when Reed Shepherd was at his best as well. So it's becoming more and more clear that Reed Shepherd is the variable for this team. So you had that 17-game stretch and they were at their best. Then you had that weird December where the defensive intensity just fell off a cliff. And they had all these ridiculous losses to teams like, the Kings and Pelicans when they had big leads. They also lost on the road to the Mavs, the Jazz, teams they had no business losing to. The effort was sloppy. The defensive rating was bottom half of the league. And then from January 1st onward, they've largely cleaned up the defense, but the offense has been bottom 10. And some of that's been, I mentioned the fatigue issues, but also, rotation choices for Ime Udoka. After Reed Shepherd played about 26 and a half minutes per game in calendar year 25, this season's portion of it, he played just 22 minutes per game in January. And Ime leaned on those defensive role player types, Josh Okogie, even at times Jayshawn Tate, Aaron Holiday, even though he's been, relegated to the shadow realm at the moment. So some of it could be fatigue. Some of it's also choices. But the bottom line is that since January, the defense has been a lot better, but the offense has fallen off a cliff. We mentioned the 3-point shooting slump, the turnovers. And so in theory, we've had 6 weeks of pretty good defensive play. There was a stat after that win over the Clippers, which if you're looking for a silver lining, Dorian Finney-Smith, I thought looked very good the last game he played, the last win on the front end of that Clippers back-to-back. And if he gets healthier, if he uses this time off to get a little recharge, and he can build on what he did against the Clippers, I mean, the Rockets are 9-0 this season when they hold opponents below 100 points. And 5 of those games have come since January 1st. So there's a lot of evidence that they are getting better defensively. Dorian Finney-Smith getting anywhere close to healthy would only help with that, be like a midseason roster addition, given what little we've had from him so far. And so in theory, the fix is pretty simple. The defense is looking better. It's just, can you get the offense, maybe not all the way back to when they were just like a juggernaut early in the year, just get them back to last year, to where they're, middle of the pack. And some of this, no Steven Adams, so you don't have the offensive rebounding superpower, so you do have to execute more. But on the other hand, you have Kevin Durant. But I think on paper, there's precedent for Ime Udoka teams getting better after the All-Star break. And the fix, look, the defense is better. The offense shouldn't be bottom 10 the way it's been since January 1st. And now they should have their legs back. I mean, on paper, you get the offense even to just a pretty good level, let alone great. Just be 10 to 15. And this team, especially against this schedule, I guess to me it's a fascinating juxtaposition, Paulo, and I'll hand it off to you here because I know my rant has been extended. But for all the negativity, the frustration of that last Clippers loss when they blew the lead, now the All-Star break with all the KD comments, the inactive trade deadline, for all the negativity, on paper, there are reasons to think that, maybe the Rockets don't get to a title contending level, but they can be a lot better than the 20-16 that they've been in the last 36 games. I guess that's my outlook going into final 29. What's your perspective as far as just overall, Paulo, your mindset heading into this final stretch?
Oh, first of all, I'm laughing here on mute. I can't believe you said the words, "My rent has been extended." I'm sorry, that just I couldn't let that one go. It's just such a funny way to put it. I'm not sure if I should read it like I'm Shams Charania reporting a contract extension. I don't know if I'm supposed to read it kind of Yoda where you're talking about yourself in the third person. It's sorry. I'll get to the analysis. I know. So regarding the rest of the season, I do think that you made some good points, but some stuff that I do disagree with. I do think while in past seasons you could have made the argument that they would have had problems with energy levels reaching the All-Star break. If that's the case, I think that's only kind of shown itself with the 3-point shooting. It might be that they're shooting worse because they don't have the legs under them, as we like to say. Defensively, both the effort has picked up and the effort wasn't good to start the season. So with all the energy, it didn't seem like the effort was that good. So I don't expect that to be, a significant upgrade. But there's a few things that I do that we can look out for that might be real upgrades. The first of all is I do think that the legs on shooting threes will affect especially Reed for 2 factors. First, it's his first real NBA season with playing minutes basically every game. And he is someone who gets a lot of lift on his jump shot. He jumps really high to shoot. And so that increases variability, and that makes it so his 3-point shots more reliant on how tired and how fresh his legs are. Beyond that, there's no longer, I don't think, reasonably the excuse of Sengun's still coming back from injury, or he's not 100%, and that's why he's mostly for his stutter on the rim, not necessarily his defense. I do think that that's been a constant regardless of health or not this season. But offensively, it does seem that like his season has trailed off after starting off really hot. Both, I think that might be a little bit because of fatigue. Might also be because it seems like his shot diet has changed again. He's not taking as many threes as he was earlier in the season. It seemed like there was a rework on his shot diet going into the season, and that seems to have regressed back to where it was last season, and that will not help his efficiency as well. So I do expect Sengun becoming fully healthy to be something that makes us better. Dorian Finney-Smith, we're getting to a point where, okay, you got to show us that you're still anywhere close to the player that you were before. Like a long time has passed. It's about time. And then I think the biggest impact is actually, well, we talked about earlier in the season that everybody was pointing out small things that they would tweak with the lineups, right? And one of the things that I brought up on the pod was, well, yes, it seems like there is a little bit some low-hanging fruit that they could use to become better. But I also said, well, we have arrived. We are a playoff team. The goal from the beginning of the season wasn't to squeak out every win that they could possibly get by, fully maximizing the team to be as good as it can be right now. And I do think that was true. We tried different things, we didn't necessarily optimize it to the full extent since the beginning of the season. I do think from this point forward, typically teams post All-Star break want to get on a run to go hot into the postseason. So I do think that we'll see a maximized version, or what Ime Udoka thinks is a maximized version of this team. Because now you do want to get to that level and sustain that level all the way through a playoff series. So I wonder if we'll see any changes, from a rotation standpoint, from a scheme standpoint, more changing schemes mid-game, more riding the hot hand when the hot hand has it going, benching players for Aaron Holiday as we saw last season. There's not as many, I guess, although there's not as many opportunities to do so, that was mostly a Jalen Green thing. And stuff like Capella taking some hook shots that don't get even close, like that strikes me as a little bit of, limit testing that we saw at certain times that I don't think we'll see moving forward. So I do expect the team to get better now. And last but not least, post All-Star break is also when teams slowly but surely, at a faster pace, start to back it up and going to tank mode. And the Rockets seem to have struggled mostly with the teams that are pretty terrible, and we've given up wins to losses to the Kings, for example, and the Pacers, or not the Pacers. We beat the Pacers, but it was a close game. I do expect that we'll get more kind of easy games in the sense that the teams aren't even trying to win, and those are some of them. Like I think a lot of our losses have come from situations like that, and those situations won't present themselves nearly as much now. So it's not just that the schedule is easier; it's that those terrible teams are even less of a threat now than they were before, because they'll slowly move into tank mode. Even though some of them have already been rolling that, I think it will be fully implemented going into the second half of the season. And so yeah, I think that's mostly it. I still don't think we have. I mean, I guess we'll see on our next segment what our expectations for what a successful season is, and what we expect to see moving forward, or what we want to see. So I guess I'll close it out on that for what I expect the next season, the second half of the season to be, and with reasons that are to be optimistic, because I do think there are.
You don't want to extend your rant anymore?
Listen, nah, my rant's done. I've got no more rant in me.
No.
Rant. Hashtag rant retired.
Yeah, sorry. One of the toughest things to do when you're trying to weave together several thoughts is to put a bow on it and pass the baton. So yeah, in terms of the exact phrasing, I did not go to school to be a broadcast journalist. For anyone who saw my All-Star break activities, I had a good vacation, went back up to Mizzou, where I went to journalism school, and well, other than the game, unfortunately, Mizzou lost to UT when I was there. But other than that, had a nice vacation. But no, I went to school to be a print journalist. So I'm a writer by trade. Broadcasting, podcasting, that's something that I've sort of picked up along the way, and I try to improve. But yeah, passing back the baton and putting a bow and summing it up, especially in a live recording. Sometimes it gets a little choppy. My apologies for not having the ideal wording, but yeah, I will not let this rant get extended. Actually, Paulo, before we get to the final segment, the next 4 games, the next week, I think to me, you've got the Hornets Thursday, Knicks Saturday in an ABC primetime game from Madison Square Garden, then 2 home games against the Jazz and the Kings. None of these are back-to-backs. To me, if you're a serious team, if you're going to make a legitimate run for the 3 seed, which I mentioned on paper, the Nuggets, I know it feels like you missed your chance to catch the Nuggets with, not making hay when they were without Jokic for a month. But, they have a far more difficult schedule coming up. You're only a game back. You're tied in the loss column. To me, if you're a serious team, you've got to be at least 3-1 over these next 4 games. You're going to be heavy favorites by double digits at home against the tanking Jazz, the tanking Kings, and then find a way to take one of those 2 in Charlotte or New York. Ideally, both. I mean, 4-0 is not implausible, but the Knicks especially are a good team. The Hornets have been playing very well of late, although now they've got a couple of suspensions since they last beat the Rockets in Houston a couple of weeks ago. But my outlook going in, these 4 games next week, none are back-to-backs. If you're a serious team, you should be at least 3-1. That's my outlook. Anything that I'm missing there?
Yes. Well, I was gonna say you should be 6-1 over the next 7 at the very least. Just because this is a bunch of terrible teams. Like Wizards are terrible, the Heat are not good. The Magic are not good this season, and they've always been a great matchup for the Rockets. The Kings are not good, the Jazz are blatantly tanking. The Knicks are good, but I'm expecting the Knicks and the Hornets game to be both coin flips, especially since, to quote the great Kevin Durant, the Hornets have such a better young core than us. So gotta take them seriously as well. So I'm expecting a coin flip game with both of them, and hopefully we win one of the coin flips.
All right, final segment, and I'm shamelessly stealing this from the Locked On Rockets roundtable that I was on earlier this week, and so I'll try and be more concise with mine because for folks who want to know my mindset in greater depth, you can just hit up the Locked On Rockets YouTube page and listen or watch as I explain it there. But the segment Jackson put together was basically what makes this a successful season for the Rockets. And I think it's a good time to discuss it, certainly coming off the All-Star break, but also, to go full circle to the Kevin Durant alleged burner controversy. I mean, if there's any potential of making bigger moves in the offseason or feeling that you need to, this is a good time to discuss, what the checkpoints are for, feeling good enough about this team to, well, certainly if you win the title, I think that's an unlikely outcome and it's not implausible. But if you don't win the title, what makes you comfortable enough over the remaining 29 games of the regular season and the ensuing playoff run to, and it's not a lock that the Rockets will make the playoffs, but it's pretty damn close. I mean, they have a decent buffer over the play-in tournament, and even if they get there, they have a huge buffer over teams in the 9 and 10 spots, so you'd probably need to win just one home game, but I think that's very unlikely. They get passed by all 3 of the Suns, the Lakers, and the Timberwolves, all with the easiest schedule. I mean, maybe things go off the rails to where that becomes realistic, but if it does, that will be pretty obvious that the Rockets need major changes in the offseason. It won't need much analysis as to what needs to happen. So in these non-title scenarios where I think, you fall to the play-in range or you win the title, it's pretty obvious what will or won't happen in the offseason. But these middle ground scenarios where you sort of stay where you've been the last few weeks, somewhere between 3 and 5 in the West, but ultimately you fall short, you're not quite on the level of the Thunder. In what scenarios are you okay, running it back and saying, hey, Fred VanVleet, Steven Adams, these are really good players that you'll be adding at full strength. DFS should be closer to full strength as well by the fall. And maybe you add one more role player this summer. You won't have the first apron hard cap and largely staying the course, or scenarios where more aggressive needs this summer are needed to feel good about next season's team and beyond and actually having a chance to win a title. And so what I settled on with Jackson and the guys, and I won't go into his greater depth tonight. If you want to hear my perspective, you can just check out LOR. I think you need to win at least one round in the playoffs because I don't think you're going to be slotted against one of the truly elite teams unless something crazy happens, like you fall to the play-in. And if that's the case, well, then you've already got your answer. And I just think the Rockets already a year ago, before trading for Kevin Durant, proved capable of, getting to game 7 of a first round series against a good but not great team. So if you're stagnant or you regress, if this team with Kevin Durant, and this is all assuming relative health, like if there's a catastrophic injury, obviously that changes things, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. I think you've got to get further than you did a year ago. I don't have a magic seed number in mind, but I would like to at least get to 52-30, the win mark you had a year ago. You don't want to take a step back. You want to do more in the playoffs. You want to look at least competitive against the truly elites. When I say that, I say Oklahoma City, probably Denver, maybe San Antonio. If you lose a competitive series in 6 or 7 games, that's okay. At least, it would sting, but I can understand it. If you go out in a sweep or gentleman's sweep and there's several blowouts, it's a different matter altogether. So do something you didn't do a year ago. Get yourself a matchup against a really good team. And if you lose that elite team, at least hold your own. And then, Jackson made this point, but I really agree with him. Make sure that none of your young guys are exposed. The way, we all felt worse about Jalen Green after that playoff run a year ago because of how easily the Warriors were able to take him out of the offense. If we get through the playoff run and like the adjustment the Spurs made to take Amen Thompson out of that game is something that we see time and time again in the playoffs, or Reed Shepherd is just completely unplayable defensively, I won't say that makes the overall season a failure, but it would make, in my opinion, all of us more reluctant to buy in on the young core moving forward. So I guess those are my checkpoints that I came to after the LOR roundtable. Do something you didn't do a year ago, i.e. win at least one playoff series, unless you're against an elite opponent in round 1. And if you are, then something went wrong and the records would speak for itself in that situation. Hold your own against whatever big boy team you do eventually draw, and make sure none of your young players are so exposed that you have significant doubt about their playoff viability moving forward. I guess those are my 3 keys for the remainder of the regular season and the playoffs. Psychologically, I would like to see them go, at least 19-10 over the final 20 games, 29 games, that is, so that they have at least the same amount of wins that they had a year ago. That could also give them a decent chance, given Denver's schedule moving up to 3 and perhaps avoiding the Thunder in the second round. But that's my general outlook as far as what would make a successful season. It's no longer championship or bust. We talked about that in some of our recent pods, especially with the Steven Adams injury added to the Fred VanVleet injury. Paulo, what do you think as far as what makes this season a success or failure over the remaining 29 games and any postseason play from there?
I think you're asking 2 different questions. I do think that the season being a success or not is a different question from, am I comfortable just running it back next season? I think the season can not be a success, and me still think that come the end of the season, running it back is still the best course of action, or running it back with slight changes, maybe consolidate a couple of role players or whatever it might be. So as far as the season being a success, to me, for the season to be a success, you need to outperform what I would expect would be a linear progression from last season with the guys we had last season. Because with what we have last season, we would have higher upside long term than what we have this season. I think that's, while I do not think that we have shortened our window with the KD trade, we did mortgage a little bit of upside via a top 10 pick or 10th pick, and giving up on Jalen Green, as much as he hasn't necessarily proven thus far to be anything better than what we saw. He still has upside, or at least more upside than in KD long term, which is not hard. So I do think that linear progression will tell you, or reasonable progression will tell you that next season you could get to round 2, because I did think that we could get to round 2 last season. A couple of things went our way that did. So a successful season would be, to me, either going 7 with Denver or OKC in round 2, or making the West Conference Finals if your round 2 opponent is the Spurs. If it's the Spurs, I just don't see the reason I would be okay losing to 7 to the Nuggets is, okay, they've been there, they've done that, they're experienced. There's no shame in losing to top 10 player of all time in his prime, Nikola Jokic, with a pretty good surrounding cast around him. So if it's to the Nuggets, I'm okay losing in 7 in round 2. If it's to the Spurs, a successful season is making the Western Conference Finals. Losing to the Spurs in round 2 to me is not a successful season. Especially so because when you look back, when you think about, the 10th pick, if you call it the 10th pick, people might argue, why we wouldn't have the space for another young guy. Well, I would counter you with this. With the 10th pick, you could likely have made the trade the Pacers made. I think it was the Pacers. Pretty sure the Pacers made with New Orleans, where they got their unprotected first next year. So with the 10th pick, that trade proves that you could have made a move to delay that pick further into the future and kept the asset, right? It's not a situation like the Josh Christopher / Usman Garuba situation where they wanted to trade back but couldn't, or trade to the future but couldn't, or the Ty Washington situation where they wanted to trade back and only able to trade into the future but were only able to trade back. It's not one of those situations. So you could have, pushed that pick along and perhaps gotten another prime asset there. So since we didn't, and since we made that investment into KD, you've got to be better than what I would have considered a successful season to be for the team we had previously. Now, successful season is different from me being comfortable running it back for the most part next season. Because the reason why that changes is because of the injuries, right? A successful season is in spite of injuries to me. What you do moving forward, you got to address the injuries and qualify those as upgrades moving forward. So if you do get to that second round and you lose to the Spurs, you could convince me that a team that lost to the Spurs in the second round, which are in that case turning out to be a better team than people expected because they're going to make the Western Conference Finals. If you're going to lose to that team, you could convince me that with Fred VanVleet and Steven Adams, and perhaps, a Dorian Finney-Smith and Clint Capella trade for a rotation piece, you could make the argument that that's enough of a jump for you to be a championship contender the year after, right? And so if you do make that, I'm like, okay, you can convince me that those are enough upgrades. I don't consider trading Dorian Finney-Smith and Clint Capella for a mid-size level role player to be a massive overhaul of the roster. So I do think that that's basically running it back. If they fall short of that, if they lose in the first round, or if they're completely uncompetitive in the second round with the Spurs, I do think that you gotta readdress the deal. And I don't think at that point you're a Fred VanVleet and a Steven Adams away. I do think that you gotta make further changes to the team, and those may include Fred VanVleet or Steven Adams, depending on the types of moves that you're trying to make. Because at that point, Fred VanVleet doesn't have a no trade clause, so you could trade him there. So yeah. That's regarding what happens in the playoffs, right? Regarding seeding, I do think that I can't consider successful a season where you're not a top 3 seed after being a top 2 seed, regardless of circumstance last season. I can't think being a 4 seed in this division right now to be a successful season after you trade for Kevin Durant. I do think you have to be better than that, especially because if you aren't a top 3 seed, you're going to face OKC in round 2. And if you're going to face OKC in round 2, unless you make it close, like the delta of outcomes is a little bit different there, right? Because if you make it close with OKC go 7, for example, that's a successful season. If you get swept by OKC in round 2, you're like, well, is that really that condemnable? Like they seem to be a generational dynasty team in the making, right? So in that case, it's a little bit harder to judge. So you do need for it to be a successful season, you need to be a top 3 seed. As far as I don't think the seeding really implicates how, like, if you're I guess it does coincide. If you are not a top 3 seed, if you aren't a top 3 seed, I do think you need to make pretty major changes unless you make it up by beating OKC in round 2, which I don't think is feasible at all.
And to be clear, like, there's more gray area than how I presented it. I was trying to sum it up in broad strokes. I mean, if there's one thing we know about the Rafael Stone era of the Rockets, they're not going to force a deal. So if they, narrowly miss out on one of these checkpoints, I mean, yeah, it's possible that we look in the offseason, especially relative to the opportunities that are or aren't available, talk ourselves back into, with the addition of Fred and Steven and, a DFS plus Capella for a solid role player type trade, to feeling that, next year could be different. It's not quite as cut and dried as I made it, just talking in, broad strokes to sort of set the table for the offseason. Because I do think that, the way last season ended did make the ultimate trade involving Jalen Green and Kevin Durant a bit more likely. It didn't lock it in by any means, but it did move the needle in that direction. And so I think the checkpoints, they're not meant to be like super literal, but I do think that it's a useful guide as we look ahead to the offseason for what scenarios they're more likely to be okay staying the course and which ones they might be a bit more active. And it's not all going to depend on that. So that's also going to depend on exactly what players come available. But I just think that's a general guide that we can use heading towards this summer. Hopefully, we won't have to talk about that for a while because hopefully the Rockets start winning a lot more games, move their way up the standings, and have a nice extended playoff run, the likes of which we were very optimistic about just a few months ago when this team was put together. Anyway, with that, I will bring this episode to a close. And by the way, some breaking news. The Rockets will be practicing midday today. So if you want to hear from Kevin Durant, it might happen then. If you're worried about, the interactions of the team and how it looks, you'll definitely have some video from reporters on the scene at the Rockets practice facility before they fly to Charlotte. So any of those concerns, we'll have a lot more info later today. So to bring it full circle, to those people wanting more discussions, I think you're going to get them unless it's just somehow entirely fake news. And I agree with you, Paulo, that's unlikely. There's at least a little bit of truth to it. That's my suspicion as well. In terms of what it means moving forward, the reason people aren't talking about it is because we don't have the information we need to make a super strong opinion just yet. We'll start getting that information within a few hours, and certainly when the team resumes play tomorrow night in Charlotte. So we'll talk more about it in future pods. Just stay tuned. I just think, at least for diehard fans of the Rockets, we're not going to rush to any conclusions. We want to be optimistic. We want this team to work out. There may be some national NBA fans or NBA media that jump to the worst case conclusion because either they want to see the Rockets fail or, they hate Kevin Durant, or maybe some Rockets fans just want a punching bag after this season has underwhelmed a little bit. But for those of us that want the best for this team, there's still a way that this can be okay. Well, there's several ways. And so until we see evidence that it's not, let's at least wait for more information and we'll see what happens. Anyway, that'll do it for this episode. If you want more from me and Paulo before the next show, best place to get it is on social media. I'm at Ben DuBose. He's at Paulo Alves NBA. And if you want to support this show, the best way to do that is at Rockets or at LaunchPod790. Still not used to the new handle for the show, but on Twitter, you go to LaunchPod790 and hit up the link tree in the bio. That's got links to our distribution partners, Apple, YouTube, Spotify, but also our friends, partners, Clutch Fans, USA Today's Rockets Wire, Sports Talk 790. If you would support their content, that would only help us look good and keep this program running as one of the most active podcasts covering Houston Rockets basketball. And as far as the distribution platforms, if you haven't already subscribed to this show, left it a positive review, please do. That's another way that we can keep looking good and make the business model work for this to continue being what we hope is one of the more active and better podcasts covering your Houston Rockets. All right, with the plugs complete, we're done. For Paulo Alves, I'm Ben DuBose. As always, thanks for listening, and please come back soon for more new episodes of the Rockets Launch Pod. Go Rockets.